And we've got our crowd on the webinar, which is great. So what I'm going to do, welcome to everyone else that's joined us. It's 2:00 and there's some very punctual people. So just as a quick bit of background, Jonny and everyone else that's listening, we're running a Scale or Fail series at the moment, which is aimed at informing, inspiring, educating companies that are looking to scale. And we've done several things so far. We've done, a couple of webinars that have been focused around thought leadership topics. We did a big event at Google Campus a couple of weeks ago called Scale or Fail. We had investors speaking, we had data analysts speaking. We had different components of areas you need to understand in order to scale. Now, what we're doing now is moving into a series where we're hearing stories from brilliant people like Jonny that are in the middle of scaling, have done some fantastic things. And what we really want, and Jonny, I'm talking to you now, is we want to hear a bit about you, your story, how you dreamed the dream for this brand, how you got traction. I mean, you're in a phenomenal place in terms of where you are now, and you're scaling and have scaled, and you're the perfect person, I think, to kick off this sort of series of stories we're doing. So, Jonny, will you introduce yourself to those listening, for those that don't know you?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, Dan, thank you for the invitation. It's always nice to participate in stuff like this. So my name is Jonny Grubin. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called SoPost, which I founded back in 2012. And our business today is very different to the original vision for the company. Today, our mission is to really build the most powerful product sampling platform in the world with a very strong focus on relevance, data, and analytics. So we have a technology platform that is used by hundreds of brands all around the world to get physical trial products into people's hands in a way that is much more targeted and gives them much more in terms of insights and data than they would if they were sort of giving out products in shops or with magazines or through some other channel. But the original idea behind SoPost was absolutely nothing to do with that. I actually moved down to London in 2009 for university, dropped out 3 months later to take another startup full time. And whilst that one failed pretty drastically, which maybe we can go on to talk about a bit more later on, the core idea behind that venture was something that really stuck with me. And for about a year or so after closing that venture, I honestly just couldn't get that idea out of my head. I'd be in bars with friends, I'd be at dinner parties, I'd be sleeping, and this thing would just be in my head. So when I started SoPost, the original idea was really all about trying to create a dynamic postal address linked to people's social IDs. Because I had this problem that, firstly, I live in central London, but I'm rarely at home. And because my letterbox is so small, at least twice a month, I get home to find I've missed a delivery, which is not only really, really, really frustrating for me, but it's also very expensive for delivery companies and retailers. And then the other problem I had, and actually I still have today, is that I don't know anyone's address. Even my sister, if I want to send her a present, I need to send her a text to get her delivery information. So the idea behind the original SoPost was about saying, firstly, your address shouldn't be a fixed place. It should be where you are or where you want stuff to be sent to. And secondly, it shouldn't matter if I don't know your address, because there are things that we all know about each other that rarely, if ever, change, like your email address, your phone number, your Twitter account, and so on and so forth. And effectively, what we were trying to do was build this intelligent data layer that would sit between an online checkout and the delivery truck, or between the post box and the delivery person, so that whilst I could just send something to Dan at bewonderful.co.uk, our system would know that because you're in the office on Thursday, that's where your delivery should be kind of dynamically routed to. So that was kind of where it started. Obviously, the business today is very different to that, but through kind of that entire journey, I mean, I'm about 10 years into that kind of whole idea now, and there have been a lot of ups and a lot of downs along the way.
What an amazing start. Now, I've probably got about 50 questions just off the back end of that introduction there. So let's kind of keep this focused, because otherwise I think we could talk all afternoon. And I think you've got so much richness in what you've experienced. So just kind of picking up on some of the transition then. So obviously you started with what was a great idea off the back of something that failed, which is an interesting transition. I mean, before we get to the scaling piece, Do you, in hindsight or even at the time, do you see certain reasons why that initial startup failed that you joined?
Yeah, there were a lot of reasons, and firstly, perhaps it's helpful if I give a bit more context to that story. So the original sort of startup was actually somebody else's idea, and there was a group of 8 of us that ended up getting together to try to build this thing and actually make it kind of real rather than just an idea. We actually all met over Twitter. So when we got together and decided that we were going to start this company, none of us had even spoken on the phone to each other, let alone kind of met in real life, which was an amazing. And I met some incredible people that way. I was a groomsman at one of their weddings, and I made a lot of very good friends for life. But when you do form a company that way, where perhaps you don't necessarily have the bonds that you might with other people, when things do start to get hard, it can be quite difficult to course correct. And one of the big problems that we had was that, firstly, we'd made a conscious decision that we weren't going to raise any investment. And because of the way we'd structured the company, nobody really sort of had enough control, is the wrong word, but nobody really had enough control to sort of steer our direction. And so when I dropped out of uni to take this thing full time, firstly, it was kind of a struggle for me because I hadn't appreciated at that time that it's pretty difficult to live in London without any income. But it also meant that, the others, because they were all focusing on other things that paid their bills, there was very limited sort of time investments that they could make in the venture. So I think I learned a lot around sort of how to form a team and how to structure and set yourself up for the best chance of success. But then alongside that, I think that we did a lot of things wrong from a product perspective. When we launched that venture, we launched with partnerships with a couple of big nationwide delivery companies. And for us, it was a massive coup that a group of 8 people with an idea had been able to secure partnerships like that. Yeah, nice. But when I went back and looked at our user flow a year or so later, I realized that it was kind of a 26-step process to actually send or receive a delivery with us. And so whilst the proposition sounded amazing, actually, when I went back and looked at things and tried to figure out why nobody was using our platform, we'd made it really hard. Instead of working hard to slot into people's daily lives and the things that they were doing at the moment, we were actually saying, hey, if you want to use our platform, it's going to be really, really, really difficult, and you're going to have to change pretty much all of your behaviors. So, we really set a big challenge there for us. And so when I went to kind of launch SoPost, one of the biggest learnings I took from that was, let's not be a walled garden. Let's work as hard as we possibly can to slot into the environment that people are already living in. And whilst we are trying to push a new way of doing things, let's at least maintain some sort of link to the status quo, so it just feels less scary, and so you can engage with people more easily. And then I think the other 2 lessons that I really took away from that failed venture were, firstly, the way we positioned things was really pretty wrong. Because we were offering a solution that meant that I could send a physical item to somebody without knowing their postal address. Right. And we thought that the biggest use case for that was sort of around privacy. Whereas actually what we found, and again, in hindsight, it's pretty obvious. If you're using a marketplace like eBay, yes, maybe there is an argument to say, I don't want the seller to know where I live. But we were pitching ourselves mainly to people who wanted to send stuff to their friends and family. Okay. And I don't really care if my friends know my address. It wasn't about the privacy side of things. It was more just about the convenience, and we completely missed it. And then the final thing was just around timing. I think we definitely did a lot of things really badly, but we could have done everything right, and we would have still just been too early to the market. And again, because we hadn't raised investment, I don't think that we would have been able to sustain ourselves for the 2 or 3 years that it would have needed for us to get to the point where actually the market was ready for what we were trying to do.
Wow. So, I mean, it just sounds like you learned an incredible amount in that season, which you've taken directly into SoPost. So I think a couple of the takeaways, even from just that piece of insight there, is obviously number one, and we see this all the time, that team culture is such a key to actually scaling. So you might have the right idea, even the right technology, but if you haven't got the right dynamics within the team to make it work, it doesn't go anywhere. And I think there's lots of examples in that. I think the other side of it as well is about, you can have a great value proposition, but if you can't back it up, if you can't deliver it, the promise doesn't match the delivery. So you end up with that sense of disappointment, that sense of disengagement. And again, it's something we see all the time, is that someone comes with a great idea, they've got a solution to a problem, it feels like it can work, but then when you start to deep dive into it, you think, hang on, that's not going to work. Or isn't that just the same as something else, but you've just put a little bit of a sticky plaster on it? And ultimately, unfortunately, I think they're some of the reasons why a lot of startups don't get to that scaling stage. They don't get to that stage where they've got a model, or they can reproduce it, they can scale it up, investors are happy, so on and so forth. So anyway, that's enough about me, but I love what you say there. I think that you should do a whole series on failing to scaling. I tell you what, I think there's the next book title for you right there. There we go. I'll be your ghostwriter. So obviously you've translated all of that into SoPost. How did you start? How did you get going? So were you one man in his idea, or what did you do?
I was, yeah, pretty much. I actually found a pretty unrisky way pretty low risk way to launch and get up and running. So I was kind of in this position where, I was focusing on this other startup for a year or so after dropping out of uni, wasn't making much money at all. And when we took the hard decision to shut things down, I went and got a job in a friend's frozen yogurt shop. And in that 2-week period, I actually made more money in those 2 weeks than I think I had in the entire 12 to 18 months since leaving uni. So, I mean, that was fine. And I certainly, would never have swapped that experience for making more money, but it did put me in a position where, you're living in London, you do need to be able to feed yourself, you need to be able to pay your rent. But after like a week or so in that frozen yogurt shop, one of the guys who was involved in that other startup had got wind that, I was making Froyo, and he got in touch and was like, "Hey Johnny, what are you doing? Come work with me." And he was at the time running an incubator/accelerator for tech companies. And he knew that I had aspirations to go off and do my own thing again. And so he kind of came to me with this offer, which was that he wanted me to join his team. He knew that I had ideas I wanted to explore. So he said, "Look, Johnny, come join us. Start full-time on our businesses in a sort of head of product type role. But as and when you have something that you want to focus on again, as long as you're covering your costs within the business, start doing a day a week on your own thing, and then 2 days a week, and then 3 days a week." And what that meant for me was that when I started SoPost, I had my salary covered. And actually for about the first 12 months of running SoPost, my income was coming from somewhere else. And it just wouldn't have been possible for me to quit my job and just hope for the best. And so I kind of started it whilst I was working there. In terms of my background, I realized very early on that I couldn't be the best programmer and the best commercial person in the world. I also realized that I enjoyed the commercial side of things more than the non-commercial side. Okay. And so I know enough about the code, but I can't build anything myself. And so when I started SoPost, a couple of friends amazingly helped me out. One of my friends, John, kind of built very basic launch website for us. Another friend, Emma, did all of my design work. And I kind of funded everything up until the date we launched. I'd had some offers of investment, but for me, it was very important to firstly show that I had skin in the game, but also, I was terrified at the time, and I still am terrified of losing investors' money. And I just didn't want someone to take that risk on me until I could at least demonstrate that I could get something to launch. So I spent probably about £2,000 getting to that launch phase. On the day we launched, I took in a relatively modest amount of investment that just gave me a bit of breathing space for the 12 months or so that would follow that. But yeah, I mean, the product that we launched with, we didn't spend sort of months and months and months building something to then hope that it was what the market wanted. We did that typical thing of launching a minimum viable product. So we created a web page where people could sign up with their Facebook or Twitter accounts. They could add their delivery information and they could create a delivery schedule off the back of it. They couldn't actually do anything from that point onwards, but for me, it wasn't about giving something to people that they could actually use. It was about understanding whether there was demand for this and whether I'd actually dropped out of uni for the right reasons.
That's interesting.
And so we launched that. We got some coverage on TechCrunch, and in terms of validating the idea, it really did. Consumers loved it, had a lot of interest from retailers and delivery companies as well. But pretty quickly, I realized that the challenge to growing this thing and implementing it on the global scale that I envisaged, it wasn't so much a technical challenge as much as it was a data challenge. In order to integrate what we wanted to do with the postal companies, yes, there were hurdles there, but none of them were insurmountable. The issue was that until we had a big database of people who had connected all of their social and physical IDs with us, it wasn't worth the delivery companies while to integrate with us. And also without having $50-60 million of venture capital money, I had no idea how I could actually attract that audience and build the database. But kind of through a stroke of luck, about 2 weeks before we launched this thing, I met a guy who was looking after Noel Gallagher's digital marketing. And we got chatting, and he, I guess, was quite excited about what I was attempting to do. And he said, look, we've been touring earlier this year. We have a DVD that we're trying to sell. So if you can help us sell more DVDs, figure something out, we'll promote it, and hey, let's just see what happens. And in my head, I just thought that was such an amazing way to get exposure for the real idea, because it was going to be pushed out to a couple of million people across email and Facebook. And also around the same time, I'd been given a piece of advice that has really stuck with me ever since, which was choose the path of least resistance. Because for so many years, I'd been sort of focused on achieving this goal, and I'd just been kind of banging my head against a brick wall, trying essentially the same thing over and over and over again, and not really getting anywhere.
Right.
And what I kind of thought was maybe this opportunity with Noel could actually be a different path to achieving that same goal, because my challenge was that I didn't know how to build this database. And there was an opportunity here to partner with Noel Gallagher to help sell copies of his DVD. So what we ended up launching was a really simple website where you could buy the DVD for a friend of yours. But instead of entering their delivery information on the checkout, you just tag them on Facebook. The friend then got a post on their Facebook timeline. If they wanted the DVD, they would click through, they'd provide their delivery details to us, at which point your credit card was billed and the thing was shipped. So it was a really cool marketing activity, but also we were then linking the Facebook account with the postal address.
Brilliant.
And the thing went well. It was a really small campaign and certainly wouldn't have scaled up to the volumes that we would have needed, but it got us a bit of exposure. And I then kind of went back to trying to change the whole postal system. But I'm so glad that we did that launch campaign with Noel Gallagher, because somebody pretty high up at Avon Cosmetics saw it. And about a month after we wrapped that up, she got in touch and was like, hey, can we have that? And from there, I didn't really understand what she saw in what we'd done with Noel Gallagher and how it related to their business. But I guess I was smart enough to recognize that she knew something that I didn't. And also, I'd taken my ego out of everything, and I was very much focused on getting to this end goal, but not necessarily being set on a certain path to achieving it. And just by, being very open-minded about what people were asking for, it kind of set us on this path where, if you fast forward 6 months from that date, we changed our entire focus away from revolutionizing the entire postal system towards the sort of early, I guess, foundations of what our whole business is today, which is all around helping brands run really powerful product sampling campaigns online. So if you were to kind of compare today and then, you'd probably wonder how on earth we made that leap. But actually, it was quite a sort of methodical process that we went through, and we're very lucky that we found a very real commercial application for what we were originally trying to do.
But that's brilliant. So you had an opportunity. You ran a test campaign. You saw where it could go, but you weren't quite sure. But you were flexible enough in your strategy to run a test campaign with Noel Gallagher, and then it helped to open up a whole new market for you. which I think is absolutely brilliant, because I think often you can get so focused on tunnel vision. This is my proposition. This is how I do it. This is who I do it for, and it doesn't work, and people don't innovate. So you had to innovate at quite an early stage.
I did, and I think the thing is, nobody cares about your idea or your way of doing things, and I think you've just got to accept that nobody owes you anything. The world doesn't owe you anything, and you can try to just push your way, or you can take the path of least resistance, find a solution that people actually want, and then adapt yourself, obviously without compromising your vision and your ethics and everything else, but adapt what you're doing to actually deliver something that people want, as opposed to trying to push your own agenda. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes we made with the first venture was that we kind of locked ourselves away for 6 to 8 months building this thing that we thought people would want, but we never actually went and asked anyone. And so when we launched and found that nobody was using it, it really shouldn't have come as a surprise to us, but it did. And I think if I'd spent 6 months building version 1 of SoPost as opposed to spending 2 weeks building it, I would have found myself in exactly the same position. And I certainly wouldn't have come up with that insight myself around saying, oh, actually what you're doing there can be adapted for product sampling. So it was purely through the act of kind of pushing out something basic and getting people's eyeballs on it that I was able to find the real application for it.
Fantastic, absolutely brilliant, and I think that's so important for our listeners, and the people that we communicate to around. They come to us and often they want a 6-month, 9-month rollout plan, but they've tested nothing. There's nothing there yet to test, and I think that the whole principle of testing and refining, absolutely brilliant. So obviously that then took you to a stage where it became about the analytics and the data and became about a brand, a brand proposition rather than a customer proposition. So what happened then? How did you take that from, hang on, we've got something here with Avon and next set of customers, to where you are now, which I believe is it 13th in the Deloitte Fast Track 50, 13th fastest growing company in the UK? I mean, that's a big jump. That's a big scaling from that story to where you are now. So, and I'm sure that's hours worth of conversation, but give us a few minutes on how you went from there to now. How did you scale?
It is a big jump, and it's really challenging. I can't remember who it was, but somebody told me years ago, there are 2 very distinct points in your business life. The first is getting to £1 million revenue, which is really, really, really difficult. And then the second part is what happens once you've hit that and you begin to scale from there. And certainly I've seen that sort of what you need to be doing operationally and as an individual at that sort of startup phase is so different from the skills and talent that you need when you're scaling the company. Right. I mean, first and foremost, it's all about people at any stage of the business. But certainly as we're scaling, the one thing that is really allowing us to do it in a very responsible and effective way now is that I've got a very strong team around me. And everyone in the company is practicing leadership, whether or not they sort of line manage anyone, they're leaders within the organization. Because it's critically important that I'm not a bottleneck in the things that we're doing to scale. And if I think back to the early days, I was doing all of our fulfillment, I was doing all of our sales, our marketing, our account management, and all of that stuff flowed through me. I'm actively now working to give away parts of my job. So when we hired our CFO in October last year, suddenly I found I got, I'm not exaggerating, 2.5 to 3 days a week of time back. Wow. And now I'm looking at the other parts of my role, the sort of sales stuff that I do, the marketing stuff, the partnerships bit. And slowly but surely, we're finding people who can do those roles a lot better than me, so that we can just grow that side of the business. And so that I can then focus more on the kind of higher level strategic side of things. So a lot of it is just about removing yourself as the founder or the entrepreneur, removing yourself from the processes and making sure you're not a bottleneck. Brilliant. Someone phrased this amazingly well for me. They said, give away your Lego. And it took me a bit of time to realize what they meant, but he was totally right, because there are parts of the role that I really love doing. I love talking to customers, I love presenting the business, and I just didn't want to give that away to people because I love doing it so much. But actually, when you look at it critically, you realize that you're slowing down your sales, because if you're the only person who is doing this thing in the business, you're just naturally acting as a bottleneck there. So I'd say, sorry.
You become the bottleneck in
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so you got to remove yourself as the bottleneck. I'd say the second and another very important thing is communication. When you're a group of 3 people, communication is really easy because you're all there. When you're 30 people, it becomes a lot harder, particularly for us where we're spread across 3 different locations and we have a couple of people who are remote as well. When you're scaling quickly, you've got to make sure that everyone knows what's going on, and also people understand the why behind the decisions. And I think if I were able to go back and sort of redo some of the past couple of years, I would have put a much stronger focus on communication, because the things where I think we've failed can all be attributed to having either people just not knowing that we were doing stuff or not understanding the reason why, which then meant that the way we were implementing things wasn't perhaps the best way that we could be doing it.
Okay, that's fantastic. And do you have, obviously when scaling a company, you're looking for the right people. Do you have, not a secret sauce, I'm not sure there is one, but do you have a set of cultures and values and things that you're looking for when you're trying to bring in the right people, aside from the skills, obviously?
Yeah, so we do. And actually, it was only about a month ago that we formally wrote down and agreed what those values are. Okay. We've all been living them over the past 7 years of the business, but we'd never actually solidified it and said, this is what it is on paper. The reason we took that step to actually get it written down is because as we scale, you have to make sure that everyone is aligned with those. And so when we're interviewing people, when we're meeting people, we certainly look to make sure that they're a cultural fit for the business. It's quite funny because we have an amazingly supportive board and set of investors, but one of the complaints that I often got from a couple of them was that I took so long to hire people, and if we just hired people into these roles, we'd be able to grow a lot faster. Okay. And my argument's always been that, and I've got no way of proving this, but my argument's always been that maybe part of the reason why we are experiencing the success that we are is because we do hire really slowly. I take a long time to fill key roles, and that's not because I'm scared of putting someone in that role, it's because I need to find the right person. Right. But by going through the process slowly, you really ensure that everyone is a right fit. And I'm very proud of the fact that our team retention rates are very high. We have very few people actually leave the business. And I think one thing that I've seen people make mistakes around is they might raise a chunk of investment and then go and hire loads of people overnight. Yeah. Firstly, you're going to just make bad hiring decisions, which I think could have been avoided if you took more time to hire the right people. But secondly, infrastructurally, you're not set up to handle that growth in team size. We may treble the size of our team in the next 18 months. The only reason we'll be able to do that as an organization is because we now have the infrastructure and support networks in place to actually handle that growth and to onboard people correctly. I see a lot of agencies that grow very quickly and they might go from 20 to 100 people, but when you actually look under the hood and you talk to people who are working there, they're not happy in their roles, which just sucks. I'd never want to be running a company where people didn't enjoy what they were doing there. But also it just makes you so inefficient as an organization. And once you go down that route, it's really hard to course correct, and it's very hard to get back on track. And I think, deliver the product services that you actually want to be delivering. The standard just slips through nobody's fault, really.
So although you're one of the fastest growing companies in the UK, you're actually saying that you're still slowing down, and you have slowed down the recruitment process and the development process in order to move quickly, in order to scale.
You've actually touched on a really good point there, because obviously I was talking about people there, but actually in terms of the tech as well. We took a very conscious decision a couple of years ago, basically to stop selling, go back and rebuild our entire platform from scratch. Right. And that was at the time a pretty hard decision to make, because who wants to slow their growth down? And it was a decision that kind of our CTO pretty much forced on me. And I'm so pleased that he did, because what it's meant is that where we are today, from a tech and platform perspective, we're able to scale very easily. You know, our platform is solid. We don't need to kind of firefight. We can actually keep building. Again, what I've seen a lot of companies do is they don't stop and think, hey, is what we've got today capable of scaling to 10 times the size of where we are, which means that things just creak. And once you're in that position, again, it's very hard to recover. So we actually really slowed down for a couple of years to get things right, which, it's not easy to do that. But I think, again, that's one of the key reasons why we're scaling as quickly as we are right now, and also why people enjoy being here as much as they do.
And how did the board and the investors take that as a sort of strategic decision? Because the mindset behind scaling is just a pure upward trajectory until kingdom come. That's what we're here to do.
Well, I was pretty worried actually, because we were raising investment at the time we made this decision, and everything was agreed, and I didn't want to mislead or lie to anyone, so I called all the new investors up and said, hey, just so you know, this is what we're going to be doing. I wanted to let you know, no worries if you want to pull your investment. And I was actually kind of amazed that they all stuck with us, and actually they said, you've recognized something that companies normally recognize too late. So they were actually all for it. And again, I think it's probably in the entrepreneur's head, this idea that all your investors are interested in growth. They definitely do want to see your company's growth, but I think it's naive to think that all they care about is that headline number. We're very much focused on being as big as we can be in the next 10 years rather than maximizing our growth in the next 12 months. So I'd say our investors are definitely focused on growth, but they're focused on the long-term growth, and they're focused on doing that the right way. And that was maybe something that I just hadn't necessarily realized at the time. But no, they were right behind it, and I think they were very surprised to see that we'd recognized it in ourselves.
That's brilliant. So it sounds like obviously you've got the right set of investors working with you. Now, from your experience, I think this is a pretty obvious answer here in some ways, but in your experience, you would say having the right investors is absolutely vital for growth.
Yeah, the analogy I use is, maybe some people do, but most people don't match with someone on Tinder and then get married the next day. Raising investment is exactly the same. In some ways, it's maybe a more important relationship because it's even harder to get out of. But no, just like I hire people slowly, I raise investment really slowly. I think, wrong investors or structuring an investment in the wrong way can kill a business. It's so important that you get that stuff right.
I can understand that. And again, we get clients come to us and they say, oh yeah, I'm going to develop an MVP, get some traction, I'm going to get investment. Who are you going to get investment from? Where are you going to get investment? Oh, I don't know, I'll just go do the rounds. And there's been no thought processes or patterns behind the right type of firm, the right type of investors. Do the values align? Are they on board? So I think that's a really valuable piece of content for some of the clients that we work with, and particularly in the scale of fail series. So I can listen to you all day, but I want to ask you before we run out of time, where are we going? Where's SoPost going? Give us an overview on the next few years. What does scaling look like over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I can't reveal too many of our secrets, but I will say, our mission as a company is to be the most powerful product sampling platform in the world, with a very strong focus on 3 core areas of relevance: data and analytics. Everything that we're doing as a team is about realizing that ambition. And so there's a lot that you'll see from us around international expansion, around exciting partnerships, and we're doing a lot of really cool work on the machine learning side of things as well. So unfortunately, there's not too much I can share, but what I can say is there's a very exciting future ahead of us, and please do keep an eye on what we're doing.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And as a sort of a parting piece of advice, for those that are listening, and obviously this goes out to our wider database, what one piece of advice would you give someone that is looking to scale?
That's easy. It's the piece of advice that I was given back in 2012 and wish I'd heard 15 years ago. Choose the path of least resistance.
Brilliant. Right, Jonny, I think that wraps it up so well. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, knowledge, insight, some of your journey. And as you said, everyone listening in, watch out for SoPost. Take care, Jonny, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks.
Speak soon.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye.